Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Good evening. Welcome to The World Over Live. We have a great show for you tonight. Naturally, news, but also a summer read that you may not have considered yet. This week, the Vatican's attorney in Kentucky, well, he's the national attorney, but in a Kentucky court case, he's arguing on the Vatican's behalf in a sex abuse trial there, and his novel legal strategy we'll discuss at length with attorney Bob Bennett, as well as Canon lawyer Father Philip Brown. And later, it's a real thrill. We have the screenwriter and author of The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, is here to talk about his new book, Dimiter. It's a great read. We'll introduce you to that and much more. But first, here's the brief news from the world over this week. Vatican officials on Friday weighed in on the news of the first man-made living cell. Monsignor Rino Fisichella, the Vatican's official bioethical expert, called the first living synthetic cell a great discovery and a positive development if correctly used. He did, however, add a word of caution.
But is at the moment is still just a theoretical research, and for this reason, until we don't know the use that will be done with this research, there is not an ethical judgment about it.
The researchers implanted or transplanted synthetic DNA into an existing host cell, changing one simple type of bacterium into a completely new species. The work has raised hopes that it could eventually lead to new fuels, better ways to clean polluted water, faster vaccine production, and much more. And the U.S. Bishops' Conference withdrew its support this week of the so-called Leadership Conference of Civil Rights and Human Rights. They cited the group's endorsement of Supreme Court nominee Elena Kagan as the reason. The bishops' withdrawal came only after a Washington watchdog group, Catholic Advocate, broke the story earlier this week. As a side note, the Bishops' Conference maintained membership with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights in spite of the group's support of gay rights and abortion access. The group also opposed the nomination of Supreme Court Justices John Roberts and Sam Alito, both Catholics. And meanwhile, the U.S. bishops are backing a recently introduced House bill that would, in statute, ban the federal funding of abortion. The abortion language was part of the health care reform package that originally passed the House last year, but eventually was stripped out of the health care bill. In a letter to members of Congress on Thursday, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, chairman of the Bishops' Pro-Life Committee, urged bipartisan support of the legislation. 93 members of the House have so far signed on to the bill. We'll keep you posted. And for the first time, British television will broadcast ads for abortion services. Marie Stopes International is responsible for a not-so-subtle "Are You Late" advertisement. It depicts young women who are unsure about their options, and then the ad diverts them to a website, a pro-abortion advocacy website. Marie Stopes is using a loophole in UK advertising standards that would allow the airing of post-conception counseling services, so long as it comes from a non-for-profit and not a commercial group. The Bishops' Conference of England and Wales has joined other pro-life groups in opposing the ad. The commercial starts Monday on Britain's Channel 4 and will run through the end of June. And in Kentucky, a plaintiff's attorney is attempting to sue the Vatican over clerical sex abuse that took place in the U.S. Typically, sovereign nations like the Vatican cannot be sued in U.S. courts. However, exceptions do exist. Lawyers for the victims, William McCurry, is arguing that the U.S. bishops are employees of the Holy See and therefore are as responsible as the respective dioceses for the abuse, the Vatican, that is. The U.S. Sixth Circuit has ruled that the Vatican does not have complete immunity. Vatican attorneys have asked the Kentucky court to dismiss the case on the grounds that the bishops are not employees of the Vatican. More on this in our next segment. Gravely concerned, those are the words of Bishop Thomas Olmsted of Phoenix after learning that an abortion took place at St. Joseph's Catholic Hospital in Phoenix. The ethics board there deemed in 2009 that an abortion was necessary to save the mother's life. The mother purportedly suffered from pulmonary hypertension. In a statement released by the diocese, Bishop Olmsted said, "An unborn child is not a disease. While medical professionals should certainly try to save a pregnant mother's life, the means by which they do it can never be by directly killing the unborn child." End quote. Sister Margaret Mary McBride, the hospital's vice president of mission integration, was apparently a member of the committee that made the decision. She has since been assigned to new duties. Bishop Olmsted confirmed that Catholics who formally cooperate in the procurement of an abortion are automatically excommunicated. And on Wednesday, some do-gooder or do-gooders replaced the stolen Mojave War Memorial Cross with an exact replica, which should have been fine given the recent Supreme Court ruling that said the cross was allowed and could be allowed on federal ground. Then on Thursday, the cross was taken down, this time by order of the Obama Justice Department. Apparently, the Justice Department claims that the Supreme Court decision allowing the original cross to stay doesn't apply to replicas. Thus, a maintenance man at the Mojave National Preserve took the replica cross down. Still, no leads on who stole the original cross. Veteran groups are now offering, they've upped their reward to $125,000 for information leading to the arrest of the cross snatcher. And finally, we'll now have to call her Mother Angelica Esquire. The Ave Maria School of Law awarded Mother Angelica an honorary law degree this past Sunday. Ave Maria Law President and Dean Eugene Milheiser praised Mother Angelica as a robust advocate for the unborn child and as an icon in the Catholic media. I might add that she's also pretty good at making arguments and winning them. Congratulations, Mother, or should I say counselor. When we return, we'll talk about the just-announced defense strategy adopted by the Holy See this week to defend itself against sex abuse litigation in the U.S. Will it work, or could the Pope be deposed? Robert Bennett and Father Philip Brown are here to discuss. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My first guest is an attorney in Washington, D.C., as well as a former member of the U.S. Bishops' National Review Board for the Protection of Children and Young People. He's back tonight to talk about the Vatican's recently announced legal strategy against sex abuse suits filed here in the U.S. against the Holy See. He's also the author of In the Ring, the Trials of a Washington Lawyer. Please welcome back to the program, Mr. Robert Bennett.
Thanks for
being back, Mr. Bennett. And joining us to talk about the canon law angle on all of this is Father Philip Brown. He's an assistant professor of canon law at the Catholic University of America. Father, thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
I want to start with this Oregon case, Bob. In 2002, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled, or the case was brought forward in 2002, the Ninth Circuit ruled that it did not, the Vatican did not have blanket immunity, given the fact that it is a sovereign state, and that in some cases it could be open to litigation. This is now going to the Supreme Court. What precedent does this set in these other cases that are being trialed and were argued a bit this week?
Well, I think it's very dangerous because what it's going to do, if the Supreme Court takes the case, or if it doesn't take the case and it just remains in the federal courts, it's going to open the door to discovery, because there'll be endless discovery about whether someone was an employee or wasn't an employee of the Holy See. And those things are very fact-oriented issues. So I think it's very dangerous. And in that case, you know, recently there was a notice to depose the Holy Father. And, you know, a lot of judges would say that's ridiculous, but there's others who would say, no, fair game. President of the United States was deposed.
Yeah.
I lost that one in the Supreme Court, and they may very well say, well, the Holy Father should be deposed too. I mean, it's very dangerous.
It's a very difficult moment.
Very
and this Kentucky case is what was being argued this week, and this is one of many cases like this connected to the sex abuse crisis. And we should say this will probably have international significance, yes? Should there be an opening here and the Holy See finds itself part of these cases?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Raymond. And
we see in Britain the call to have the Holy Father tried before the International Criminal Court, and others trying to.
Yes, and the British justices are much more prone to grant those sorts of things. One observation I would make, Raymond, is there doesn't seem to be any coordination between the crisis management part and the legal part. In the legal cases, they're advancing very technical legal defenses, statute of limitations. So if a victim, it's beyond a year, well, you can't sue us. Well, is that consistent with the message the church wants to deliver, to reclaim its moral authority? In one case, they asserted that the child was contributorily negligent. I mean, that may be a defense in a certain kind of case, but does the church really want those kinds of defenses raised?
In these cases, and in cases like it, Bob, help us all understand this. You've dealt with very high-profile figures, including the President of the United States. When you're dealing with a case like that, it's usually not one lawyer, is it? It's usually a team of lawyers who come to consult on various aspects of a case, yes?
Oh, yes. You put together a team of several lawyers, and you work in there, you know, what is the crisis management plan? I mean, I don't think the Holy Father is being, his position is being made clear. You know, last week on his trip to Portugal, he came out and he said that this is not the problem of outside persecution, it's persecution of sinners within the church.
Right, the problem is coming from within the church.
Which was inconsistent with what a couple of other Vatican spokespeople have said. So they don't have their act together.
And now, in the case of these various cases, there's one representative of the Holy See, Jeffrey Lena. He's a sole practitioner, a lawyer out of California. He doesn't seem to have that team of lawyers behind him to either coordinate strategy or deal with the complexities at hand, yes?
You know, I don't know enough about Mr. Lena, but I was taken back that the church, and he may very well be a very important part of a team, that they don't have a team there. And, you know, Mr. Anderson is going to have a field day because they are very well coordinated and they are very well financed. And I don't think the church is in the same situation, although it could be very easily.
Father, I want to bring you into this discussion, Father Philip Brown. The Federal Court of Appeal, now this case, this Kentucky case, is in the Federal Court of Appeal. The Sixth Circuit ruled that if a tort is committed, a bishop may be considered an employee of the Holy See. How does that square with canon law? Is the bishop considered an employee or in any way a suffragette of the Holy See?
I would say in canon law and Catholic theology, absolutely not. Raymond, you have to distinguish between popular notions about the Catholic Church and what the Catholic Church actually is. And the structures of the Church and these relationships between the bishop and the Roman pontiff is really something that is a product of the Church's theology. These are theological questions and depend upon the doctrine of the Church. And so I'm a little bit concerned that the civil attorneys in these matters are inviting the civil courts to rush in where angels and demons would fear to tread, because they are so fraught with questions that relate to theology and doctrine of the church. That's also why I think it's so important to have attorneys representing the church that are able to communicate to the civil courts the real nature of the questions that they are proposing here, and how dangerously close, I think, they are beginning to wander towards some very fundamental constitutional questions. So when you ask if, the only way you can describe this to a civil court is by way of analogy. If you haven't studied theology and canon law for 4 or 6 or 8 years, you don't understand it from within. So you have to try to get to that, and we all know that analogy is limp. But to say that a diocesan bishop is an employee of the Holy Father or the Vatican, to me, is like saying that the governor of Virginia or the governor of Pennsylvania is an employee of the President of the United States or the federal government. Everyone knows that's not true. It does not represent accurately at all what the real structure of, in that case, the United States government is and state governments, nor does that represent what the structure of the church is.
But there's a challenge here in that the Pope appoints bishops, he assigns them to dioceses, so there is some authority there, at least in their initial placement, yes, and the creation of their office.
That's true, because the church's structure in this sense, first of all, goes out of its theology and the relationship of the apostles with one another and Peter to the apostles, but it also has relied upon the structures of civil government out of the Middle Ages that relied upon monarchical systems. We don't have a monarchical system. But the structure of the Catholic Church and these lines of authority and responsibility are not products of American law and American constitutional law. And where does an American court have jurisdiction to determine a question about the relationship between a bishop and the Roman pontiff?
Good point.
There's a long, bad history about that.
I agree with the father. I think this aspect is just missed completely in this litigation, and it shouldn't be. One of the points that the plaintiff's lawyers are making is that the prefect, I think it's called the prefect of the Congregation of Faith, which currently the Pope, as Cardinal Ratzinger headed, is he took within his role deciding which of the priests would be removed or not. The appeals sort of go there.
In 2001, they took that authority.
And that is being used by the plaintiff's lawyers to say, see, there isn't all this separation. There is this one church, and they're using that to go after the Holy See.
But that, of course, was a judicial process. So that's like trying to hold a court in the United States responsible for the disposition of a judicial case that was referred to it by the prosecutorial authorities. That's never happened.
Now, in the Sixth Circuit in Kentucky, Bob, they ruled that the bishop could be considered an employee of the Holy See if a tort was committed. Now, Lena is once again making the argument on behalf of the Holy See. He's gone now to the appeals court and said, well, they're not employees. This is the same argument that he made before and lost on. Is it wise to continue making the same argument again?
Well, only if you are going to do this in a fragmented fashion. Only if you say, well, I lost that one, but maybe I can win this one. But this is what I'm saying. There has to be a more unified approach, because the plaintiff's lawyers are always going to find another plaintiff someplace, and they'll just keep trying one court after another until the claim works.
Yeah, eventually the plates are going to fall here. You can only keep so many in the air.
Exactly right. So I don't think they have gotten together and coordinated how they are going to defend it legally under American law, with due respect to canon law, with due respect to the crisis management aspects of it.
Now, the other point that was raised this week is this whole notion of the foreign immunity, that a foreign sovereignty is immune from litigation in the United States and within a court system of any country. Your thoughts on invoking that again? Now, they've lost this in Oregon, in Kentucky, repeatedly in courts. Why are they still making that same argument?
I don't know, but there are exceptions to the act where a foreign sovereign can be held responsible, and they are just repeatedly...
They're trying to chip away at the immunity.
Chip away at that. You know, I have a view. I'm not suggesting it would be successful, but I think an effort should be made, if it hasn't already been made, to consolidate all of these cases in the federal system. You know, you have a panel of that consolidates, they call it multi-litigation panel, try to get all these cases there, make the arguments. You know,
to close the door on this once and for all.
Close the door, say to people, you know, okay, a year we'll give you, but 2 years, get them all in there and get these things resolved. Because each time there's an unfavorable ruling, plaintiffs' lawyers leak it to the media. It triggers another bad story.
And another spate of these little, it's death by 1,000 swords or suits in this case.
Death by a thousand cuts. But the other thing that's bothering me is that in these crises that I handle, which are not church-related, the public positions you take are critical. And they must complement the legal strategy. And the Pope is just not being, who's speaking for the pontiff? Who's speaking for the Vatican? You never read the same person twice.
Yeah. No, it seems to be a multi-headed approach here, and that's the nature of the Vatican, isn't it, Father? Yeah. I mean, after all of these years, it's the nature of the bureaucracy. It's the nature of having a global church that, and I guess it vouches for the point that there isn't a central command here. Everybody is kind of left to his own devices, yes?
Exactly.
Let's talk for a moment about this 1962 document. The English translation is Crimes of Solicitation. In it, the plaintiff's attorneys in this Kentucky case are claiming that this is the smoking gun. I quote, they say, since our case and no other is about holding the Vatican accountable for the bishop's failure to report to civil authorities, any policy that gags the bishop is relevant and material. They're holding this 1962 document up as a smoking gun. What does that document actually say, Father?
Well, the document is actually an internal document of the Roman Catholic Church for the investigation of accusations of this nature, which, by the way, was formulated under a very old version of the law. As you know, the whole law of the church was reformed
in the 80s.
In 1983. And I think what opens the door for them to make that suggestion is a misinterpretation of that document. Because what the document does is it tries to, as all canonical investigations do, and in fact many civil law investigations, tries to protect those who are being investigated and those who are potential victims of crimes until
these are only solicitations in confession, we should say. It's a spiritual document in many ways.
And confession is absolutely protected in church law from any kind of disclosure whatsoever. It's called the seal of confession. And it carries the most serious canonical penalties for violation of the confidentiality of that seal. And so when you're dealing with an investigation into something that's related to confession, obviously the law of the church is going to say you can't reveal any of this to anyone because it touches on matters that took place within the sacrament of reconciliation. But by the same token, it's also trying to protect those who are involved.
But is it saying that the bishops can't go to civil authorities and report these crimes?
No, not once a crime is uncovered. It's not saying that at all. It's saying protect the investigation in the process in a very similar way.
It's about the rights of the priest in the midst of the crisis. It has nothing to do with reporting him to authorities. It's about his rights in the church.
But not just the priest, but the others involved in a way that is similar to the way juvenile courts proceed and do not allow people to reveal what goes on in the juvenile court.
Go ahead, Bob.
This is very presumptuous for me to tell the Holy Father what he should say, but he has already said persecution is coming within the church. I think the Holy Father should come out and say, not only, as he has recently said, this is a sin, but child abuse is a crime. And I think Father will confirm that Canon law says it's a crime, and he should tell people they should cooperate with the authorities.
And he's done that. He has done that in recent days.
And that just has to be repeated and repeated. The second point that I would make is that I often hear the argument that the church has been around for thousands of years, and
it will survive.
It will survive, and of course it will survive this. I mean, they've had other crises, but what I am concerned about is the church reclaiming its moral authority. I don't think anybody can look at what's happening and not say there has been a diminishment of that moral authority.
In the public
What
sphere.
issues is the church not coming out and speaking about because they're weighing, is this the right time to do it?
Go ahead, Father.
And I would reinforce what Bob is saying by saying not only is it a crime, it's an especially egregious crime that should and must be reported to the appropriate authorities so that it can be dealt with
The
appropriately.
old millstone around the neck crime. Bob, in our final minute, what's worst case scenario coming out of these separate but conjoined in many ways cases?
I think the worst scenario is some judge decides that the Holy Father has to be deposed, that all of the files of the Vatican be opened. This will generate just more and more and more and more. And, I think, and the absence of a coordinated approach to bring an end to this. Those are the things that I think, and the total loss of the moral authority of the bishops. The thing the lay people cannot understand is why have so many priests been punished and so few bishops?
It's a good question. Father, your thought on what the church should do at this point?
Well, I think the church is in a very difficult position because we really have a commitment today to transparency that perhaps is not as great in the past as it is now. But I also have a very great concern that if you are much of a student of history, you know that confrontations between the church and the state don't turn out very well for the state or for the church.
No.
And so I would like to see more efforts to try to mediate these differences in a way that's not going to lead to that kind of
And maybe some
confrontation.
kind of panel like this that brings all these cases together would put a full stop on these cases and give us a definitive hearing and yet answer on this and
Yes.
stop the thousands of cases that keep cascading forward. Bob
That's
Bennett,
right.
Father Brown, thank you both for being here. We could go on all night. Robert Bennett's In the Ring, The Trials of a Washington Lawyer is available at bookstores everywhere. You can learn more about the School of Canon Law at the Catholic University of America by visiting their website at cua.edu. Up next, we'll visit with author and screenwriter William Peter Blatty. You'll remember him as the author of The Exorcist. He's here to talk about his latest book, Dimiter, as well as his life and Catholic faith, The World Over Live. Continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest has quite a history. He's a well-known author, screenwriter, and film director. His most popular work was the best-selling novel, The Exorcist, and his screenplay of the same name won him an Academy Award. But he started his Hollywood career writing comedies, including one of my favorite Pink Panther movies, A Shot in the Dark. His latest book, Dimiter, was just released, and it's a riveting read. He sat down with me recently to talk about his long career, his faith, and why it took him so long to finish Dimiter. Here's my interview with William Peter Blatty. Let's talk for a moment about this book. I will tell you, and I was sharing some of this before we sat on the set. It is rare that I have an author on the program because I am such a stickler about my fiction, and it is rare that I encounter something that has that's both well written and has a sort of haunted spirit about it. This is a grace-haunted book, if you'll permit me.
I love it.
Tell me, how would you describe this? It's awfully difficult. I've read psychological thriller. I think it's sort of a spiritual mystery, if you will. How would you describe this book?
Well, it's so many things, but primarily when I first conceived of the plot, I thought of it as a mystery of identity. The closest reference I can come to that, I think, is the great Morris West's The Devil's Advocate. You're wondering, who is this guy? What story about him is true? And that's the glue that keeps you turning the page to the end. And it was all very well when I wrote the prologue, which takes place in a torture chamber, largely in Albania, and ends with a rather stunning mission being performed by this extraordinary human being. But then we go to Jerusalem, and we meet a new set of characters with a new set of problems, and couple of mysterious deaths taking place, shall we say, some paranormal activity going on, some of them mostly benign, as a matter of fact. And the plan was, well, it still is, as you read along, wondering, what has this got to do with this extraordinary human, if that's what he is, that we met in Albania? It strikes you, wait a minute. One of these guys is him. It's Dimiter.
This
It's
Dimiter,
that guy.
this mysterious figure.
Yes, and then the glue is, which one?
And who is he? What is he?
Oh, well, that is the mystery of the book.
No, I won't ask you to reveal it. We don't want to ruin it for people.
No. It's extraordinary as to who he is.
But for you, Bill, this has been a 30-plus year journey. The first part of this book, the gripping 80-page intro to this, which is a prologue, 80-page prologue. I thought, how does he keep this going, keep the tension up and the drama for 80 pages? And you do.
Thank you.
That was written 30-something years ago.
Yes.
And then you pick it up. You've been struggling all these years. What took you so long?
Well, a number of things. First, I had, I did my research in Jerusalem over many weeks, and I gathered together a trunk full of single-spaced notes when they were all transcribed, which is just absolute hell to go through and reabsorb. And secondly, I don't outline. I have never outlined. And I rely upon, I guess you'd say I'm an unconscious artist. And I rely upon the unconscious to bring it to me. Keep it interesting from the first word, page. Keep it and make everything consistent as you go along. And if you make rules, I've always had a fear that you are proscribing your unconscious from departing from that area with something infinitely better than your idea.
You're confining the imagination. You're confining the spirit, if you will, the creative spark.
Absolutely, and it's always worked for me, except in this case, when I finished the Albanian section, which is straight ahead, now the plot is so complex, and I've got all these peas under all these shells to shuffle around, and at the same time, I can't get into the main character's head, really, because then you know who he is. How am I going to do this? And it turned out, I believe, that what I had in my hand was intractable story, an intractable story that could not be whipped by any ordinary means. Now, all right.
Go ahead. Tell me how you unraveled
Only
this.
your audience is going to have believed this. I was down when I lived in Santa Barbara in the 90s with a potentially lethal illness. And while I was in bed waiting to get word on whether the cancer had gotten into my nodes, I prayed to the Blessed Virgin that, dear Mother, save my life and I will finish this book. I thought it meant much or something to her because from the beginning it was apostolic. That was the intention. In my novel Legion, which you may not be familiar with, at one point Lieutenant Kinderman has a dream in which he is talking to, I think it's Humphrey Bogart, dressed in his Casablanca outfit. And Bogart objects, yes, this is all wonderful, your theory in explaining the problem of evil, but you're leaving out Christ. And Kinderman says, I'm coming to Christ, I'm coming to Christ. That novel never did. But my thought was, this one will, where I finally get to Christ in spades. Well, the Blessed Mother, as you might depend upon it, she saved my life. And I, being a flaky writer, immediately welshed. I'll get...
Immediately procrastinated.
No, I got this thing here I have to do. I did, but year after year, I would pick it up again and be defeated by trying to solve the problem of the structure in terms of an ordinary novel. And then, now we come to the part that only your audience will believe. My 19-year-old son, Peter, to whom the novel is dedicated, passed away about 3.5 years ago. And about 2 years after that, Julie and I went to a memorial mass for a classmate of his named Tommy Carroll. This was at the Heights School in Potomac, an Opus Dei school. And during the mass, while I was actually riveted to the homily, it was excellent, it was wonderful. Very often my mind will wander, it didn't today, but suddenly into my mind came Dimiter again. Oh, please, please, I thought we were through with all that. And I said a quick prayer that I can only very roughly paraphrase, which was, Holy Spirit, if you want this, by the way, I'd only said one prayer in my life before to the Holy Spirit. This was time number 2. I said, you really want this, if you're serious now, tell me how to do it. There was a little bit of profanity, I think, mixed into the prayer.
Thank you for sparing us that.
He's heard it before.
Okay.
And I walked out of that chapel with my beautiful wife, Julie, and she was about to go on to the parking lot. I said, wait, honey. What? Jewel, I see the entire structure of the novel clearly in my mind, and I can tell you the very last line. And really, I went home, worked about 17, 18 hours a day at heat, and in a matter of weeks completed a very rough draft, let's say. But the structure was there. The last line was, I had seen it in the chapel. And only recently, a writer friend told me, well, I'll tell you what your hang-up was. Don't you know that what you have done in this novel is you've created a new form of the novel. You're not just doing a straight-ahead narrative. You're intermixing it with interrogations, interviews, reports, and one way or the other.
There's dialogue back and forth like a play at some point.
Yes, back and forth. And I don't think it's, well, I've never seen it done before, but at any rate, it took that groundbreaking approach to with the problem, and not for me, it's, I swear.
Yeah. Well, you feel it in the book. As I was telling you earlier, there is one of my favorite authors is Graham Greene, and I love it because Greene weaves into the doubt, into the complexity. There's always this palpable sense of grace and something larger than these characters hovering around them. But it's not in the line, it's around the line. This book achieves that same end. How aware are you of that?
Thank you. No,
the
I wasn't
rewriting
until
process in...
No. It was just, I don't know who wrote it. I just wrote. I just kept writing and writing and drinking more coffee. There is a parallel between the whiskey priest in The Power and the Glory of the Labyrinthine Ways and Dimiter in that tale of totally the most unlikely redemption, and it comes from who knows where. And there is a character in it. I saw that on television on Playhouse 90, starring Laurence Olivier as the priest, very Mexican, and a young George C. Scott as the lieutenant.
That's right.
And that young George C. Scott as the lieutenant was always in my mind when I was creating Colonel Vlora, the head of Albanian security. That was always my picture of him.
He was the image there.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And of course, you worked with George C. Scott on what they called The Exorcist 3. It's actually The Exorcist 2. It was the sequel that you were involved in and wrote, of course, Legion.
He was a beauty to work with.
Wow, no, great actor.
I was a terrible director.
Oh, come on, don't say that. Now, I want to talk about, in the characters in Dimiter, all of these characters, it seems to me, once we get to Jerusalem, but even before that, the interrogators, these people are struggling they're struggling against faith, if you will. They want to doubt. They want to live in their disbelief, and yet it's almost as if they're haunted by belief.
Yes.
How much of that comes from your own life and those around you?
Well, none of that from those around me, Raymond. And as a young Catholic and educated, 8 years of Jesuit schooling, I had, subject to the same intellectual doubts that any young man who is thinking at all. might have. And, you know, I worked my way, I think, reasonably all through that. And it was not, though, I don't know how I got onto this, but it's interesting. 6 years ago, I realized that I was home, that I was totally settled into my faith and could never look back without a qualm or a single question. It was the occasion of going to Rome with my wife Julie and my young boys, at the time Peter and Paul, and I wanted to see the bones of St. Peter. And I was told you can't see them anymore. Well, I made a reservation with the Scavi anyway, and we went down to the excavations.
Right.
Some stunning things there. You know, you drop a plumb line from the center of the nave of St. Peter's, and you're down into that room, they say, where he was buried. Then we finally turned a corner into the room, and this young guide says, and now we are going to be able to see the bones of St. Peter.
Oh.
What? And Raymond, I am not a man given easily to strong emotion. After the young man explained that the bones were in a translucent box that had been built for the Vatican by NASA, I looked at those bones and I remembered a favorite passage of mine in which the risen Lord appears on the shore. They're out fishing. They start rowing like crazy, not fast enough for Peter. He grabs a rope, jumps in the water, and starts swimming like mad. And I thought of that, and I fell to my knees and found myself saying over and over again, I love you, I love you, I love you. And later I said, well, I'm home.
You're home.
I mean, I don't need a plumb line to drop on.
Let's go back a bit in your career, in your life. You were first known as a comic writer. You wrote hilarious novels and novellas, and then were involved with Blake Edwards. You wrote one of what I consider one of the funniest films ever, A Shot in the Dark. Well, you know, clearly the best of the Pink Panther canon, and amazingly, I didn't see it until about 3 years ago. I'd seen everyone but A Shot in the Dark. But so I've caught up since then. So tell me what that was like, and then talk a little bit about the transition between A Shot in the Dark, Peter Sellers, Inspector Clouseau, Blake Edwards, and The Exorcist.
Well, let me tell you about the transition between comedy generally. You might guide me back into Inspector Clouseau. I had written comic novels that, well, fine, I'll blush. The New York Times, in a review by Martin Levin, the chief picker of wings off flies for the New York Times, he let off a review of one of my novels saying, nobody can write funnier lines than William Peter Blatty. And in one of those novels, for just give you a taste, the ghost of William Shakespeare finally manages to break through to the earth plane to prove he wrote his own plays, only to find himself trapped in Fidel Castro's office. Things happen from there.
This is I, Billy Shakespeare.
I, Billy Shakespeare. Oh, comedy dried up in Hollywood. I never made my living from books. It was always from motion pictures. They were always comedic. My first was a Danny Kaye comedy. And it dried up, and I had nothing to do in my days of the summer but to go to the unemployment office and, incidentally, where I had the occasion to fire my agent because I saw him 3 lines over one day.
In the unemployment line.
Yes.
Not a good sign for an agent.
And I couldn't get hired for any drama, any series for Blatty. He not only writes comedy, it's off the wall. I mean, it's crazy farce. I have nothing else to do. And I wrote The Exorcist.
How did it come to you? You became aware of this 1949 case, right?
Yeah, in class. Oh, you want to talk for a moment about there being no coincidences with the Holy Spirit? Get ready.
Okay.
I am, first of all, as a young man, I am living in total impoverishment. My father was gone. My mother, a Lebanese immigrant who could not read or write, supported me and a couple of the other kids peddling homemade quince jelly on the streets. And consequently, we lived at a lot of places because we didn't pay the rent. We always paid first month. You never had to pay second.
Never played second.
And my mother had a strategy worthy of Clausewitz to fend off the, Back then, the landlord would come and knock on the door and all that. And I saw her one day with Mrs. Corelli, God bless her. Her son was in my class at St. Stephen's. She puts out her hand for the rent, and my mother said, as she said to every landlord, "You shut up, you crooked landlord. I know all about you." And then she'd slowly close the door, maintaining eye contact. Right? Well, my mother was a master of psychology. And for another 3 or 4 months, sometimes, we'd live rent-free while the landlord wondered what it was that my mother knew about him. Well, by the way, I lived at about 30 different addresses during grammar school. We were the only nomadic tribe living in Brooklyn, apparently. The day came then when I'm in Brooklyn Prep on scholarship, Jesuit school, and the time is coming for me to think about college, which I didn't think about because I was already lining up a job pushing some kind of an ice cream cart as soon as summer came. Couldn't buy the books at CCNY. And my mother invites a lady friend in for lunch. Lady friend brings a friend whose name is burned into my memory, Neil Sullivan. He's a teacher, a layman who taught theology at Georgetown. Because he had 2 1/2 helpings, when they left, my mother turned to me and said, "Willie, you're gonna go Georgetown." Mama, come on, it's a joke. How are we gonna pay for that? It's a rich kid's school. She said, "You're gonna win scholarship." So to keep her from nagging and kvetching at me, I applied to one university, Georgetown, because I had been told, assured, yes, they did give out 1 scholarship a year. You've got to go up to at Columbia, take the 7-hour college board, and if you do better than anybody else, you get a scholarship. Well, I left that exam feeling, this is true, that Rockefeller had been my father. Georgetown was not going to accept me. And at the start of the summer, I got a letter saying that I had won the scholarship. Now, my first thought was I the only one who had applied? Because that could rationally explain it. But I didn't know yet what the Holy Spirit had in mind. I went to Georgetown, and because of that scholarship, I was able to sit in the front row in theology class and listen to a Jesuit named Father Eugene Gallagher start telling the wildest stories about something called possession and an exorcism going on in the neighborhood. Wow. It never left my mind, and I thought immediately, if someone could ever document that case. I was nonfiction. I'm not. What a help to someone's faith it could be, to everyone's faith, especially mine. And that was the germ. Of course, I didn't realize then that that person would wind up being me.
How does your faith, and how did your faith shape that work, The Exorcist, which I would argue, because of it is such a in-your-face assessment of evil. You must look, and you're consequently also looking at its opposite without knowing it.
Yeah. It was, again, from the start, an apostolic work. I mean, I wasn't expecting something big out of The Exorcist. But I'm a comic novelist. I would like it to be respectfully reviewed and not to get people poking fun at me, and then I'll go back to my career. But this is something I've always thought should be done. And moreover, when I decided, okay, I'm going to write it now, I called Father Gallagher, in whose class I'd heard about all this. I said, do you have a contact? Is that exorcist still alive? He said, yes, he is. He gave me his name, his number. Father William F. Bowdern. He was at University of St. Louis. And I wrote to him. And I told him what I wanted to do. And he wrote back and said, I very much wanted to help you because I had a diary of the case I was on that lasted over 6 weeks, much of it in a hospital, with witnesses' signatures at the end of every day. But I went to Archbishop Hannaberry, and the Archbishop said, no, we have promised total confidentiality to the family, which, by the way, made me suspect all the more this was authentic, because this family is not kooks looking for publicity.
Right.
Far from it. And, but he signed his letter. I wish I could have helped you more, he said. I thought it would do great good, but I can go no farther. But he said, I can tell you this. The case I was involved in was the real thing. I had no doubt about it then. I have no doubt about it now. Sincerely yours in Christ. Oh, he had said, yes, good luck with your apostolate of the pen.
Oh,
That's right.
apostolate of the pen.
Yeah. I wrote back and said, listen, wait, let's talk about this. We'll make this a nonfiction book, and it'll be by you, right? And I'll be your editor. No, he couldn't. And in fact, after the novel somehow got written, somehow after getting turned down everywhere, as was the movie idea, and the film was made in particular, oh boy, I would hear from Bill Bowdern, Father Bowdern, and say, listen, the family is extremely upset. Apparently somebody in your film company was on The Tonight Show and connected the 1949 case with, and they are extremely upset. I would keep, please. In fact, I changed the boy to a girl because
to shield
his
the family.
entreaty. Yeah, please, don't do anything that will connect him with
Now, after the book came out and after the film, I think when you were working on the film, you received this priest's diary in the mail, yes?
Oh, when I was just about to work on the screenplay, in the mail came, how did you know that?
I know all kinds of things. That's my job, Bill.
I got a big manila envelope and a little letter in it from a monk at the Alexian Brothers Hospital. And he said, Mr. Blatty, I have read your book and thought it very interesting. And I thought you would be very interested in what I've enclosed here. It's some papers that I found, that we found in the bedside table of an Alexian brother who died here in the hospital. And I opened it up, it was the diary.
What do you want people to take away from this work, from Dimiter?
Christ is the answer. That's what they should take away. And that, well, it's only a subtext, but even, you know, my son Paul, when he was age 3, I don't know what it was my son Peter said to him from his crib, but Paul, he looked over and said, Petey, this isn't the real world, heaven is. He apprehended what is absolutely the truth. There is, the real world is coming, and without getting into stereotypes of heaven, hell, or purgatory, this world and the suffering in it all has to do with how well you are able, or how much of what we refer to as heaven you can receive.
What are you doing next?
Well, I have completed another novel that I started right after Dimiter. The engine was still hot. It's called Crazy. It comes out in October. It is also apostolic, but a little easier to read maybe than Dimiter. It's, how would I describe it? Portrait of Jenny in reverse, as told by Holden Caulfield.
I like that. William Peter Blatty's Dimiter is a fantastic read. Anybody who's into spy thrillers or religious thrillers will love it. It's available at bookstores everywhere and online. That's all the time we have, but we want to remind you, for occasional updates and commentary, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo. I'm always at RaymondArroyo.com. And guess who is at the top of the bestseller list, the Catholic bestseller list? The Prayers and Personal Devotions of Mother Angelica. She's still there. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.